Welcome back. School districts across Florida, including here on the Suncoast, are trying to figure out how to comply with Florida's new medical marijuana law, even though under federal law it is still illegal. Last fall, Florida voters voted overwhelmingly to make the use of medical marijuana legal. But for the public schools, it is a sticky issue. While some school districts say medical marijuana will be administered to students just like any other medication as long as they have a prescription, other school departments still have no idea what to do. One reason, under federal law, as we mentioned, marijuana, whether it is being prescribed by a doctor or not, is still illegal. Joining us for more is Caroline Zucker, the chair of the Sarasota County School Board, Mitchell Teitelbaum, general counsel of the Manatee County School District, and Dr. Barry Gordon of the Compassionate Cannabis Clinic in Venice. So here's the interesting question. It's really kind of interesting how different school districts can interpret what they can do differently. I was looking at a story out of West Palm Beach. The folks out there say if a doctor says this is medication and the state of Florida has laws that it can be given to children in need, there will be appropriate policies in place, especially for something like this, and it will be dispensed like any other medication that the student should get. Why is what's being done in West Palm Beach not being done in Sarasota and Manatee County?
Well, for number one, it's really not that cut and clear. It is for the state, but we also have federal regulations, and federal regulations always takes precedence over the state. So we do not want to jeopardize our federal funding, so we're not doing that. What we're doing is working with the parents. Each principal will work with the parent, and the parent will come to the school and administer the drug.
Mitchell, is that the same procedure in Manatee?
It's not the same procedure, but there's different issues for that particular reason. Right now, there's no clear-cut decision how to interpret the new law. I can tell you there's constitutional challenges from the Second Amendment. When this was voted by the voters, it did not include schools, yet the most recent legislative sessions expanded it to schools. So there is a constitutional challenge that is ripe for someone to make. Not necessarily that it would be our particular school district, but notwithstanding, it does lead to confusion and some inconsistency.
Doctor, you have something here that is unlikely to change anytime soon, even if Florida basically fixes or modifies things to make the state law more understandable for school districts, because federal law is not going to change, especially under this administration. If anything, you have an attorney general who is vehemently opposed to medical marijuana. So, what is the community that you're involved with telling local school districts and parents?
Well, I think the state, basically did leave it up to the school districts, Alan, which is really interesting, and you see how different districts are taking different approaches. I think the most important thing is to remember the child and to remember the welfare of the child, of course. So it's all about access, and I think to a certain extent working with the parents surely is a reasonable thing to do. I think most parents of special needs children would be willing to make accommodations to make sure that the medicine is going to be administered in the school. I think the best news, quite frankly, is that a year from now, there may be other products available, topical patches, for example, things that could be put on at home that may be able to administer the medicine throughout the day so that perhaps it won't be as tedious as it is now.
That would be that would solve the problem that apparently Sarasota is talking about in terms of not taking possession of it. Is that something that you are hoping will evolve in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we don't want the liability of administering injections to our children, even though we understand the need for them. It's just, and we also don't want to go against federal law. It really puts us in a bind there. What is it we should and shouldn't do? And yes, of course, children come first. I mean, their needs come first. But how do you protect yourself, protect your staff, and take care of the welfare of the children? I mean, that's a serious question.
All right, we are just getting started in this conversation, and we'll have more on medical marijuana in the schools right after we check First Alert Weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. Medical marijuana is now legal in Florida, but it remains illegal under federal law. So what are local schools supposed to do for those kids who have valid prescriptions from their doctors? Joining us tonight for more is Caroline Zucker, the chair of the Sarasota County School Board, Mitchell Teitelbaum, the general counsel of the Manatee County School District, and Dr. Barry Gordon, the Compassionate Care cannabis clinic in Venice. And Doctor, I'll start with you because Mitchell, shared with us the voters' referendum, which specifically says nothing requires the violation of federal law or purports to give immunity under federal law. Nothing in this section requires any accommodation of on-site medical use of marijuana in any place, including a place of education. So how do you get around that, especially when it comes to federal law?
Well, I think you have to look at the intent of what the constitutional amendment was all about, Alan. It was really about increasing access to medical marijuana for all the citizens of Florida. And I think to a certain extent that includes students. There are protections at the federal level with the Cole Memorandum and,
What is that, just for
well,
viewers to understand?
It came out at the federal level protecting state programs that were highly regulated from federal interference, But my point is, and believe me, I respect the legal aspects, and I think Senator Stubbe had a very excellent point in the report from earlier. Each legislative session is going to bring up new issues, and quite frankly, that's the reason why I continue to come on your show and advocate for, as we go along, to make this the best program that we can. So I think surely hearing all sides, from the legal aspect and the school board aspect is important. But you have to remember that what the constitutional amendment was about was ensuring access for all.
Senator Stubbe did say in Justice Story that the legislature will come back and modify what its work in terms of regulations repeatedly over the next couple of years. But I'm wondering if either one of you, if your opinions about whether your local school districts should be able to administer medical marijuana to students will change unless, again, federal law changes or there's some kind of direction from the federal government.
I think that that federal law right now is controlling, and under the Supremacy Clause, federal law will trump state law. In this particular instance, the last legislative session was a discussion of 8A and defined who is a caregiver, and a caregiver are the parents, and under the statute, which is in front of me, there can only be one caregiver. So if there can only be one caregiver and the caregiver can only be the parents, then how could school personnel also be a caregiver?
Here is also the reality that a lot of folks who are watching this right now, who parents with children who may have a prescription for this, they all live busy lives. They all, many families, both the spouse and the husband, the husband or wife work. So how could you expect any family member to come in 2 times a day or so to administer this to their child?
But how can you expect a teacher or someone in a school system to administer a drug that's illegal under federal law? How can you expect your teachers to do that? We are educators. Well, we're healthcare workers. We are now nutritionists. We feed them, clothe them. There has to be a point where you do not break the Constitution, the federal Constitution. I have always heard that took precedence over anything that the states did. So until that's fixed, I will not be comfortable, even though I could feel for the mother on television a little while ago who would love her child to be able to be administered the drug. And I understand that people work, in 3 and 4 jobs. I understand that. But still, it's an awful burden for us to put on our teachers and staff when it's not legal for them.
Well, with all due respect, I think, quite frankly, there are much more dangerous medications already being administered in the schools.
For instance?
Well, Adderall and other medications for ADD, absolutely. There, I would suspect, other seizure medicines that are being administered.
But
now,
those medications are legal under federal law.
Well, fair enough. But, Alan, you can talk about the morality, of where we're at the federal level at this point. All I know is that in the state of Florida, we have a program voted on by 71% of the state's, residents that is calling for increased access. And, I think a lot of these things are going to be litigated out over the next 2 to 3 years. I think in most cases, common sense and parents working with school districts, I think will resolve most of these problems. I think in general, most of the parents, of course, and the school personnel have the same thing in mind, which is the benefit of and the welfare of the child.
How many times do you have issues that school districts across the state see differently in terms of the legality of what they are allowed or not allowed to do?
Well, I would say to you it's quite common, but I think here there's confusion amongst the different school districts as to what to do next. For how do we develop a policy that would potentially violate federal law, and how do we develop a policy where caregivers were clearly defined, but yet could include school personnel, but not necessarily in these circumstances?
Let me ask you this question, because obviously medical marijuana has been legalized in other states before Florida did. I would imagine now that you have a number of years of testing out there about whether or not the federal government will then charge anyone with a crime. What have you learned or not learned from, let's say, California or Colorado or Washington State or so forth?
Well, I trust my attorney, and my attorney has not said anything about it being in the schools in those areas. So I really couldn't even answer your question because I don't know.
Well, I would say, Alan, you know, we've talked about this on, you know, other times I've been on the show. A lot of times you wonder why we are reinventing the wheel here in Florida, and you would think that there would be many, many cases where this has been discussed in the past, and my suspicion is, once again, it would tend to fall for the welfare of the child, you know, and once again, I'm all about federal law and attempting to obey it. But I think to a certain extent, when we have excellent state law with the protection that we have with the Cole, you know, memorandum and the Rohrabacher, you know.
But Doctor, let me stop you there, because we may have had a change in the administration in Washington, and obviously the new Attorney General is adamantly opposed to medical marijuana, but the Obama administration did not change or sign anything into law that basically changed whether or not marijuana was an illegal under federal law.
Well, I think everybody's waiting, you know, for those times, Alan. And I think, you know, what we're seeing across the nation, quite frankly, is a groundswell, you know, positivity towards the benefits of medical cannabis. I think it's just a matter of, you know, being on the right side of history right now and trying to do the right thing for each individual patient, and that includes pediatric patients as well.
Well, presently it's a Schedule I drug. I mean, there's no question, there's no dispute amongst any of us. Under federal law, it's a Schedule I drug. Until that changes, the playing field does not necessarily change, because federal law will trump state law.
Caroline, where is Sarasota in terms of its regulating, or at least talking about the policy?
We just had a discussion at our last workshop on this issue, and what we came down with was, the superintendent was very clear, and what we came down with was that the principal at each school will work with the parents at that school, and the parents will be able to come in and administer the marijuana to their child.
And Mitchell, quickly with Manatee County.
Manatee County has not come into any situation where this issue has arisen. And if it would arise, it would be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
So no parent has come to the school district and said, I want my child to get medical marijuana?
There's been no physician orders for marijuana to a student, nor has any parental request been made to date.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with final thoughts when we return. How are local schools dealing with the new medical marijuana law? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. Caroline, I would imagine that we're going to get a lot of your comment on this topic tonight. What would you like people to know about the policy of the Sarasota School District at this point?
You know, while we understand the need for medical marijuana for some of our students, we also have to be aware of the possibility of litigation, and the cost that it would cost us for litigation would take away from the education of our children. So you're balancing, and until it's clear in law, legally, that we can administer marijuana to our youth, I would not be in favor of doing that.
All right, Mitchell?
Well, I think that it will rise and fall with the federal statute, and ultimately, right now, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. Until such change takes place, federal law will trump state law, and under the Supremacy Clause, we must follow the federal law over the state law.
Barry, you've been on the show many times over the last 2 years. You know, you were on before Florida voters voted for medical marijuana. Now that they have, but it seems that there are other obstacles that you're going to be fighting for. After hearing this conversation tonight, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, the thing I want to bring out, Alan, is that the program is in existence. We have many patients going to the dispensaries and getting excellent medication and achieving relief. And I think what's going to happen is just step by step by step, we'll continue to work through these specific types of issues. And once again, that's the reason why I continue to accept every invitation that you give me to come and continue with the education about why medicinal cannabis is different than recreational cannabis. And especially when it comes to the pediatric population, there's so many benefits that can be had. And I know we'll get it worked out to get this appropriately into the schools.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all. FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And we want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Caroline Zucker is the chair of the Sarasota School Board. Mitchell Teitelbaum is the general counsel of the Manatee County School District. And Dr. Barry Gordon is with the Compassionate Cannabis Clinic in Venice.